Something changes in a man when he hits his 40s, not on the outside, on the inside, and it doesn't happen with a big moment or a loud announcement. There's no conversation about it, no explanation given to anyone. He just wakes up one day and something in him is done waiting, done performing, done being the version of himself he built for other people's comfort. And the moment that switch flips, the people closest to him feel it immediately, especially the women in his life. They can't name it right away, but they feel it. Something is different, something shifted, and it makes them uncomfortable in a way they weren't expecting and honestly weren't prepared for. Now, before you assume this is about a man becoming cold or checked out or difficult to be around, stop. That's not what this is. This is not about a man falling apart. This is not about anger or bitterness or some dramatic crisis he's going through. It's actually about a man finally coming together, finally getting solid, finally stopping the one thing he has been doing his whole adult life without even realizing he was doing it. And that one thing is this: he stops making himself smaller so the people around him feel bigger. That's the decision. That's the shift. It sounds simple when you say it out loud, but if you actually sit with it for a moment, you'll start to feel how enormous it really is, because most men have been shrinking since they were boys, pulling back in conversations, swallowing opinions, laughing at things that aren't funny just to keep the atmosphere light, agreeing when they don't agree, going along with things that don't sit right with them, staying quiet in moments when something in them wanted to speak, not because they were weak, but because somewhere early in life they picked up the belief that keeping everyone around them comfortable was their responsibility, their job, their role. And they have been showing up to that job every single day for 20, sometimes 30 years, without anyone ever asking them to clock out. And then something happens in the 40s. The weight of that job, the sheer exhaustion of carrying it for so long, finally becomes too heavy to ignore, and the man, quietly and without making a scene, puts it down. This is the moment the people around him feel, and here is exactly why it makes certain women uncomfortable, because a lot of the dynamic in that relationship, whether it is a marriage or a long relationship or even a close friendship, was built on top of that version of him. The version that adjusted, the version that bent, the version that absorbed tension and made space and smoothed things over. That version was familiar, that version was predictable. That version could be counted on to eventually come around, and now that version is gone, and in his place stands someone they do not have the same automatic reach over, not because he became difficult, but because he became honest, and honest is a lot harder to manage than agreeable. Sign 1. He stops explaining himself. There is a version of this man that justifies everything before anyone even asks. He comes home later than expected and immediately explains where he was before his partner says a word. He makes a decision about something and lists all his reasons without being prompted. He changes his mind about plans and prepares a small speech about the thought process behind it. He does this on automatic. He has done it for so long that it feels like normal communication to him, like being open, like being a good partner. But look at what it actually is underneath all that. It is a man who does not fully believe he has the right to make decisions without getting approval first. It is a man who is constantly, quietly, asking permission to be himself. When this shift happens in his 40s, that behavior starts to fade. Not because he becomes secretive or stops caring about the people in his life, but because he realizes, maybe for the first time clearly, that his choices do not need a defense. He went somewhere. He decided something. He changed his mind about something. These are things a grown man is allowed to do without submitting a report about it afterward. And the women who are used to receiving those explanations feel the absence of them like a missing wall in a room they knew well. Suddenly there is nothing to question or redirect or negotiate with. He just made the decision and he is at peace with it. That quiet peace, that unbothered calm he carries about his own choices, is genuinely disorienting to someone who had access to his self-doubt. Because his self-doubt was a door. Every time he over-explained, he was handing someone the key, and he just quietly changed the lock, not to keep anyone out, but because he finally realized he never needed their permission to walk through his own door in the first place. Sign 2. He gets comfortable with people being disappointed in him. This one takes most men decades to reach, because the need to not disappoint people, especially women, especially the ones he loves, is one of the deepest and most quietly controlling needs a man carries through his life. It shapes so much of what he agrees to, what he says yes to when every part of him means no, how much of his own energy and peace he gives away trying to make sure the people around him stay okay, trying to make sure no one feels let down by him, A man in his 40s who has made this silent decision starts allowing people to be disappointed, not to be cruel, not on purpose, but because he finally gets something that sounds harsh when you first hear it, but is really just honest. You cannot manage another grown person's feelings for them. You can be decent, you can be kind, you can be honest and fair, but you cannot take ownership of how someone else reacts when they don't get what they wanted from you. That is their emotional work to do. It was never yours to carry. When he stops trying to do that work on behalf of everyone around him, some people get upset, some call him selfish, some say he changed, and they are right, he did change. He stopped quietly sacrificing his own peace so the people around him never had to sit with any discomfort. And the women who built their dynamic with him, partly on his inability to tolerate disappointing them, suddenly find themselves holding feelings he used to absorb before they even fully formed, and some of them do not handle that well. Not because they are bad people, but because they never had to handle it before. He always got there first. Sign 3. He stops chasing validation from people who never gave it freely. Most men carry at least one relationship into their 40s that runs on this specific kind of quiet exhaustion. It is the relationship where the approval always feels just slightly out of reach, where he does something genuinely good and the response is flat, where he works hard at something and it gets acknowledged but never really celebrated, where he shares something real and personal and it gets minimized or redirected before it can land. And he keeps trying, he keeps showing up, keeps doing more, keeps being more, keeps hoping that eventually he will hit the right combination that unlocks the warmth he has been working toward this whole time. The man who makes 2. His silent shift stops playing that game, not with anger, not with a big conversation where he walks through his list of grievances. He just quietly stops auditioning, stops performing for an audience that was never going to give him a standing ovation no matter how good the performance was. He does not announce this. He does not explain it. He just stops reaching. And this is deeply uncomfortable for the person who had him in that loop. Because that loop was leverage, the almost approval, the warmth that was always just one more effort away. That was a leash. A quiet, invisible one, and he just slipped it without making a sound. He is not angry about it. He is not cold. He just stopped needing the thing they were using to keep him reaching. And someone who loses that kind of leverage over a person they love or a person they have grown used to having access to does not always know what to do next, because the entire dynamic was built on his hunger, and he woke up one day and the hunger was just gone. Sign 4. He starts saying no without softening it. For most of his life, when this man said no, it came wrapped in 10 other things. I would love to, but I am really slammed right now. I cannot make it because of this thing that came up. Maybe next time, let me check and see. He softened it every single time, padded it, buried the no inside a pile of maybes so the other person would not feel the full weight of being turned down. Because he was managing their reaction in advance. He was pre-handling their disappointment before it even had a chance to arrive. That is how tuned in he was to everyone else's emotional comfort. That is how much of his energy went to it. The man in his 40s who has made this shift starts saying no differently, plainly, without the pile of reasons, without the apologetic setup. Just no. Or that does not work for me, or I am going to pass on that. And he says it without the guilty expression, without the energy that asks for forgiveness before the other person has even reacted, just clean, calm and settled. And people who were used to getting a yes out of him eventually, who knew that if they pushed a little or waited a little, the no would soften into a maybe and the maybe would eventually become a yes, find this version of him genuinely hard to deal with. Because there is nothing to grab onto, no guilt buried in there to pull on, no residual need to please that they can reach in and activate. He said no, and his whole body means it, and he is not losing any sleep over their reaction to it. Sign 5. He becomes harder to provoke. There was a time when this man could be activated with very little effort, not violently, not in any way that was dramatic or dangerous, but emotionally. A specific tone of voice would get under his skin, a particular comment delivered a certain way would land, and he would spend the next few hours turning it over in his head. A look across a room at the wrong moment could completely change the color of his evening. He felt things deeply, and those feelings showed up on the surface quickly. And the people around him learned over time exactly where those pressure points were. And sometimes, not always deliberately, but sometimes they used that knowledge. Because a man who reacts is a man you can read, a man you can predict, a man who tells you where he is emotionally without you having to ask. The man who makes this silent decision becomes much harder to read, not because he went numb or stopped feeling things, but because he stopped letting every internal reaction automatically bubbles. Become an external one. He heard the comment, he felt the tone, he noticed the look, and he did not take the bait. He sat with it inside himself, processed it quietly, and kept going. Calm, steady, not performing calm, actually calm. And the women who knew exactly which buttons to press to get a visible reaction from him find this new version of him unsettling in a way they did not expect, because they lost their read on him. They cannot tell what landed and what did not. They cannot feel where he is emotionally the way they used to. They cannot calibrate the dynamic the way they are used to calibrating it, because he stopped feeding information into the system they built around his reactions. He became, in the most quiet and unbothered way, unreadable. And unreadable means they have to actually ask, actually communicate directly, actually show up honestly instead of working the room, and that is new territory for a dynamic that never required it before. Sign 6. He stops needing the relationship to tell him who he is. This one cuts the deepest, because for a lot of men, for most of their adult lives, the relationship was not just emotionally important, it was identity-bearing. The health of the relationship quietly determined how he felt about himself on any given day. When things between them were good, he was okay. When things were tense or distant or off, something in him was off too. Her mood was his weather. Her approval was his barometer. The relationship was the foundation his sense of self was sitting on, and she had more influence over that foundation than either of them fully realized. The man who makes this shift starts building his sense of who he is from the inside rather than the outside. His good day stops depending on her energy that morning. His confidence does not rise when she is warm and drop when she is distant. He has things he cares about, things he is building or learning or working toward that exist completely separately from the relationship, and he tends to those things with a calm seriousness that has nothing to do with whether things are smooth between them right now. And this is genuinely uncomfortable for a woman who was used to being the emotional center of his world. Not because she was trying to control him, not because she was doing anything wrong, just because that was how it worked. He orbited her. His emotional gravity pulled toward her automatically, and now it does not. He is still present. He still loves her. He still shows up. But he has his own center now, his own ground. He is not orbiting anything. He is just standing in himself. And when a man finds his own ground and stops orbiting, the whole relationship has to find a new shape. And finding that new shape is hard. It requires both people to grow, and not everyone is ready for that kind of growth when it arrives unannounced. Sign 7. He gets quiet in a way that used to terrify him. There was a time in this man's life when silence felt like danger. When things went quiet between him and someone he cared about, he rushed to fill it. He checked in. He asked if everything was okay. He reached out first. He started conversations he did not know how to finish just to break the tension. He kept prodding at the quiet because silence felt like evidence that something was wrong. And if something was wrong, it was probably connected to him somehow. And if it was connected to him, he needed to fix it before it got worse. So the silence never lasted long. He would not let it. He was too uncomfortable in it. The man in his 40s who has made this shift learns to sit inside silence without the panic. He stops treating quiet as a problem that needs solving immediately. If the mood in the room is heavy, he does not perform to lighten it. If she is distant, he does not chase the distance. He just exists in it, present, stable, not anxious, not performing ease, actually at ease. He has learned that not every silence is an emergency. Not every shift in the emotional temperature of a room is his responsibility to fix, and he is no longer willing to exhaust himself trying to manage weather that was never his to control. And for a woman who learned somewhere along the way that going quiet or pulling back would bring him to her, that his discomfort with silence was a reliable mechanism she could count on, this new stillness in him is confusing, because the silence is not working the way it used to. He is not showing up at the emotional door with his hands out asking what he did wrong. He is just in the other room, calm, fine, living, and she has to decide if she is going to close that distance or let it breathe. And that is a choice she was not used to having to make, because he always made it for her. Sign 8. He accepts that not everyone will be happy with who he is becoming. This is the last one, And it is the one that makes all the others possible, because every single shift described here, the clean no, the silence he can sit in, the validation he stopped chasing, the explanations he stopped giving, none of it sticks without this final one. None of it can hold without a man who has genuinely made peace with this one hard truth. Some people are not going to like who he is becoming. Some of them are going to say he changed. Some of them are going to miss the version of him that was easier to redirect, easier to move, easier to access, and they are going to frame that version as the real him, the good him, the one who was present and caring and not like this. And for a long time in his life, that accusation alone would have been enough to pull him back. He would have bent himself back into the familiar shape just to make that feeling stop. Because being called selfish or cold or changed by someone he loves is one of the most effective ways to get a man to abandon his own growth and return to whoever he was before it started threatening the dynamic. But the man who has made this silent decision looks at that reaction clearly. He sees it for what it is underneath the emotion. It is not someone grieving the loss of him. It is someone experiencing the loss of access to him. And those two things are completely different. One is about love. The other is about control. And once a man can see that difference clearly, once he can hold that distinction steady in his chest without flinching, he stops taking that reaction as a reason to shrink back. He can have compassion for the discomfort he is causing without letting that compassion become a leash that walks him back to who he used to be. He is not becoming hard. He is not becoming someone who stopped loving or feeling, or being present in the lives of people who matter to him. He is becoming someone who does all of those things from a solid place instead of an anxious one, from a full place instead of a depleted one, from a real place instead of a performed one. And that is not a loss for anyone around him, even if it feels like one for a while, even if the adjustment period is uncomfortable and the renegotiation of old dynamics is messy and some relationships do not survive the shift. The ones that do survive, it becomes something real, something honest, something that does not require either person to be less than they actually are. Here is what all of this comes down to. This shift does not happen because a man stopped caring. It happens because he finally started caring about the right things, his own peace, his own truth, his own life. The men who make this decision, who make it quietly without announcement or drama or a need for anyone to understand it right away, those men become genuinely good to be around. Not because they are easier, because they are real, and real is rare. Real is actually worth something. If you are inside this shift right now, or if you can feel it beginning somewhere in you, do not fight it. Do not let anyone's discomfort shame you back into the smaller version of yourself you have already outgrown. The fact that your growth is making certain people uncomfortable is not a sign that you are getting something wrong. It might be the clearest sign yet that you are finally getting something right. And if nobody in your life has said that to you plainly, now you have heard it. Hit subscribe. I make content that puts into words the things men already feel but cannot always find the language for. Drop a comment and tell me which one of these hit the closest to something real in your own life. I read every single one. I will see you in the next video.